Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story that isn't really about diplomacy or national resolve or even who's willing to help whom. It's actually a story about a cold, hard number. We're going to look really closely at why the arithmetic of global air defense fundamentally broke down in 2026. You see, this isn't some political debate. It's a brutal, on-the-ground logistical reality that is completely reshaping modern warfare.
Let's go back to just after midnight on August 1st, 2026. The sky over Kyiv absolutely filled up. Dozens of tracer arcs rose up to meet these incoming drones, and against those, well, the defense was just extraordinary. But then a second layer of contacts dropped in from vastly higher up, moving incredibly faster. 27 Russian ballistic missiles came in on these steep, totally unforgiving arcs, and out of all of those, exactly one was intercepted. Just one out of 27.
10 people were killed that night, and President Volodymyr Zelenskyy gave the reason, and he put it pretty bluntly, saying there are no interceptors left for the Patriot system. This single, devastatingly deadly night is probably the sharpest illustration we have that air defense is, at its core, a brutal arithmetic problem long before it ever becomes a political one.
Section 1. The depth of the magazine. To really understand why this happened, we need to zoom out from the emotional micro-level tragedy of that night and look at the macro-level logistics that are driving it. So let's look at the core concept here. Air defense experts use this term called magazine depth. And it's not about how clever your software is or, how powerful your radar is. It is simply a measure of how many rounds you can fire before the launcher is completely empty and how fast the factory can actually refill it, because an interceptor is a consumable. It takes years to build, but literally seconds to spend.
And the numbers here brilliantly illustrate the crisis we're facing. Based on a 2026 Foreign Policy Research Institute analysis, Lockheed Martin was producing roughly 1.7 PAC-3 interceptors per day. Okay, now contrast that with the expenditure. We're looking at an estimated 225 rounds expended per day during the early days of the Iran war. That is a staggering 132-to-1 consumption to production ratio. I mean, at this current capacity, it takes 3 entire years of manufacturing just to replace what gets used in a single month of war.
Section 2. One pool, two wars. Which brings us to this massive global systemic issue that connects multiple conflicts to one very, very fragile supply chain.
Look at the actual mechanism connecting a war in the Middle East to a dark night in Kyiv. There isn't some separate Ukrainian stockpile of Patriot interceptors, and there's no separate Middle Eastern stockpile either. There is just one singular global PAC-3 pool. So, when interceptors are being drained in the Gulf, well, they are physically gone for Kyiv.
To see why releasing any more interceptors has become so exceedingly difficult, look at this really impartial assessment from Mark Kansian at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He noted that U.S. inventories were drawn down to somewhere around 800 or 900 interceptors, and that's a red line that war planners simply do not want to go below. Because when a nation hits its baseline for its own defense, the taps just turn off.
And by August 5th, the real-world impact of that shared pool hit hard. Ukraine received only roughly a third of the air defense missiles in 2026 compared to what they got in 2025. And President Zelenskyy actually stated that the Middle East war was the only official explanation given by partners for this drastic, sustained drop.
Section 3. Why you cannot simply build more. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, if everyone needs these things, why don't we just build more of them?
While Washington certainly tried to just write a bigger check. On July 29, 2026, the U.S. Army signed a record-breaking $58.6 billion contract with Lockheed Martin. The goal? To triple output to 2,000 missiles a year. But take a close look at the target date there. By 2030. Writing a massive check solves the funding issue, sure, but the missing ingredient here is time. And time is something you just cannot buy.
This exploded diagram of a PAC-3 MSE interceptor shows the real industrial anatomy of the problem. Step 1, the solid rocket motor. That carries a lead time of 30 months. Step 2, the active radar seeker, which comes from a single Boeing facility in Alabama. And then Step 3, final assembly takes another 24 months. You literally cannot buy your way past a 30-month rocket motor bottleneck. So every single interceptor fired tonight, yeah, it had to be ordered years ago.
Section 4. The exchange rate of the sky. This massive production delay really forces us to look at the brutal economic disparity between attacking and defending in modern warfare. Honestly, the cruelest part of this whole arithmetic is that defenders do not choose the exchange rate, the attackers do. Here we have a $20,000 crude attack drone going up against a Patriot interceptor that costs upwards of $4 million. And military doctrine actually makes it worse. To guarantee a kill against a high-value threat, defenders frequently have to fire 2 of these incredibly expensive interceptors just to take down one cheap threat.
Set that wild cost against the actual supply. Electronic warfare specialists estimate Russia produces roughly 70 Iskander-class ballistic missiles every single month. Contrast that steady, unending monthly production with the years it takes to refill the defender's magazine. This isn't just a battle anymore, it is a doomed subtraction problem with a mathematically known answer.
Section 5. The substitutes and their ceiling. So, what are the alternatives here?
Well, Ukraine hasn't just sat still. They've deployed interceptor drones like the Sting, electronic warfare, mobile fire groups, and dispersal tactics. And to be clear, these tools are fantastic against slow, navigating threats like Shahed drones. But they definitely hit a hard ceiling. A ballistic missile in its terminal dive is moving at thousands of kilometers an hour on a really steep arc. You simply cannot jam gravity.
This sheer desperation for a cheaper solution led directly to the Freya program. This is a pan-European push aiming to create a $700,000 Ukrainian-made interceptor by early 2027. But honestly, even if they get it working or somehow navigate the heavily contested political waters of local licensing deals for Patriots, analysts all pretty much agree that setting up that domestic production takes years.
Section 6. 2 readings of the same shortage. When we look at exactly why the magazines are empty today, there are really 2 overlapping explanations. And we aren't going to choose between them, because the reality is they absolutely exist side by side.
Here are the 2 lenses we need to look through. On the left, we have physics. That's the genuine 30-month supply constraint of rocket motors and seekers that absolutely no political decision can wish away. The interceptors simply don't exist fast enough. But then on the right, we have prioritization. This is the view that stockpiles do exist in Europe, but governments are hoarding them for their own defense or maybe for political leverage. We impartially report both here because a real physical shortage and allied prioritization choices can and definitely do operate simultaneously.
The grim result of both physics and prioritization is captured right here in Ukraine's July 2026 stats. They successfully intercepted roughly 7 in 10 cruise missiles, which is great. But for ballistic missiles, only 29 out of 195. It tells a very clear story. The defense works beautifully against the cheaper, slower threats, but it has completely run out of answers for the fast, expensive ones.
But I think the most crucial takeaway for us is this. This is not just a Ukraine story. Military planners across Eastern Europe, the Gulf, and the Western Pacific are all doing this exact same grim subtraction right now. You have 3 major global theaters drawing their defense from one single shared reservoir.
Ultimately, the world is caught in the gap between 2 very different clocks. Billions of dollars can be appropriated by a government in a single afternoon. But a production line to build the highly complex missiles that money buys? Well, that takes half a decade to spin up. And in the gap between those 2 clocks, cities are left undefended, simply because the magazine isn't deep enough.
Which leaves us with a rather haunting geopolitical reality. If a single stockpile has to cover 3 wars, who decides which city is defended?